and welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the Podcast. I am your host, Anna, and this week I am back yet again with another returning guest of the podcast this year. And if you think I'm done, I'm not even close. But this time, for this episode today, Mr. Philip Fracassi returns to talk about his horror release this year, The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, which came out from Tor Nightfire earlier this year. It is such a cool book. I love what Philip does with the slasher subgenre, kind of subverting some expectations, and we talk about that. We also talk about some preconceived notions about age in media and a bunch of other things like his character work in this novel, which is phenomenal per usual. It's a really great conversation, and I hope that you all enjoy it. Hello, Mr. Philip Fracassi. The second time you've been on this podcast? I think second.
Well, it's the second time you and I have spoken. I don't know if it's for the
Yeah.
same podcast or not, but you and I spoke, I think for your channel, maybe the
Yes.
first time.
Yes. So return guest, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. I'm just, as we mentioned in the pregame, I am in the midst of promoting the new book, which is exciting, and happy to be chatting with folks about it, and excited to see you again after we got to meet in StokerCon, which was fun.
Yes,
That was a good
very.
event. That was a nice event. There was a lot of nice. You know what was nice about StokerCon? There was a lot of fresh blood there. I
Yeah.
thought, like having gone to like 10 of them. I liked that there were more, I don't know how better to phrase it, but more influencer type people there versus just writers and editors. It seemed like they were more like more social media folks and reviewer.
Yeah.
So that was nice. That was a nice kind of like it added some freshness to the event where we're usually just a bunch of writers sitting around drinking.
Yeah. Well, I was glad to see like Brandon Baker was there, and I got to meet him in person, which was really cool. He's big on TikTok, and Sonia and all them. Like that was really, really nice to be able to meet them in person, instead of virtually. But no, Stoker
Yeah.
was great. Haunted hotel and all. I mean,
Yeah.
every weirdness of that hotel, everybody's got a
Weird,
story.
very weird hotel. Yeah, yeah. Sonia was actually at AuthorCon as well, so that was the second time I'd gotten to meet
Oh,
her, which
nice.
was
Yeah.
nice. Spooky, curious for those who are
Yeah.
listening who may not know. Um, yeah, there was a bunch of people there. It was good. It was a good mix. I enjoyed it. So hopefully, are you going to go to Pittsburgh next
Oh,
year?
look,
You're in now. Now it's like
the ticket was booked or purchased. The
I
hotel was booked as
remember.
soon as it could happen. You were the
I
one who,
remember seeing you Saturday night at the tail end, and I was like, "Dude, what's?" Because you had been so happy that whole time. And I was like, "Dude, what's
yeah.
wrong?" And you were like, "It's like you were just so bummed out that it was ending." And you're
Yeah.
like, "I'm having
No, it
such a
was the
good time.
most,
I don't want to."
it was the
Yeah,
most melancholic, I don't even know how to
joy.
describe it. Pretty much like everybody was just like coming off the high, and then everybody was like, shit, we have fights tomorrow. And it
Yeah,
was so depressing after that.
I think there's like a StokerCon blues or something. There's like
Oh,
a,
post
there's like
Stoker.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, not for me. I love when it's over. I'm like, great, bye.
Yeah.
I'm going home. I got, I
But
got work to do.
I do have you to thank though, because you were one of the, there was a couple people who were like, you need to go this year, and you were one of them. So
Yeah.
you pushed the needle over the edge on that one.
Good, good, good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's good. Like I said, you'll meet so many people and you meet great writers. And for those who are listening, it's a public event. You can go. You just got to buy a thing, a ticket or a
Yeah.
badge. But it's actually technically it's for readers, but it ends up being a lot of industry people.
Yeah, no, it's a great time. I mean, the panels were great. I mean, just getting to meet everybody in person was super cool. Getting to meet
Yeah,
like some of the people who work behind the scenes that you don't even realize, like the people that you've been emailing, like
right. And
for
it
months and months is really
and I'll
cool.
tell you, and yeah, and you get them, and everyone's really nice and welcoming. The writer, all horror writers are all really nice for the most part, except for Ron Malfi. Um, Malfi's the only one you got to watch out for, but everyone else is really nice. But I was going to say is, and I've said this to a lot of people before, especially writers, but even to yourself and others who are just in the industry. It makes it, to your point, it makes a huge difference when you meet somebody in person because
Oh
the next
yeah.
time you email them or the next time you message them, it's not just like you're not just like a blank page. You're like somebody that you've interacted with. You've put there's flesh on the bone, as it
Yeah.
were. And it does make a difference. And early on in my writing career, when I would go like 10 years ago, when I would go
Mhm.
to conventions and I would meet writers and those begat relationships and friendships and that I don't think it would have had if I had never met them in person. So it's a good idea to do for you writers listening out there or industry folks. Hit those conventions, meet people. It's a good way to work your way into the scene.
I think if the horror genre had a tourism section department, so to speak, I think that you should be their spokesperson because
Oh, that's it.
you're selling it real good right now, Phil.
That's it. I'm done. That was the end of it. That
That
was
was
the
it?
whole,
Okay.
yeah. So that's the tourism.
So we don't need to talk about your novel now. We're done now.
Yeah, we're done.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, anytime. Anyway, so of course we are here to talk about the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, which came out this week. We are recording this on release week. It came out with Tor Nightfire. It is a slasher of a different kind, I would say. It still hits those certain beats, but I would say that you explore so much with this book. And I want to go ahead and open the floor. I'm going to let you do your normal little introductory spiel about who you are and the book
Yeah.
in case people are not familiar.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, the people who are not familiar with me, which is probably the majority of the people listening. Yeah. I am a horror writer. I'm a horror writer. I'm a thriller writer. I'm a sci-fi. I have my books are supernatural thrillers that lean heavily into horror. Some of them are straight up horror, but I've also written science fiction and some more thriller kind of based stuff. Matter of fact, I would put Autumn Springs as sort of a more thriller than horror, but we can get into that. But and yeah, I'm a screenwriter. I've written movies for Lifetime and Disney, um, and that's me. And I've been doing this for about 10 years. And my books that have come out on the novel side are Child Alone with Strangers and Third Rule of Time Travel and Gothic and Boys in the Valley and Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre.
Perfect. Very well said.
Thank you.
It's almost like you do this for a living or something. But
Mm.
anyway, to go back to the novel, the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, I feel like I've talked to you about this before. Or in general, it's been like a point of discussion in the horror community, kind of about the renaissance that the slasher is having, about it being more than just final girls and the slasher and violence, you know. And I think that you open so many doors for so many discussions for like societal introspection about how we treat people with this book because as the title suggests, it's set in a retirement home. So we're dealing with elderly characters. Do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit? You've mentioned it to me before that this is kind of a personal story for you.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and just talk about how the book started for you, the point of inspiration, and why it kind of is personal, if you want to get into that?
Yeah. I mean, the idea came from when I was actually touring for Boys in the Valley in 2023, and my wife and I were staying at a like a Marriott in Virginia, but it was like this. It was a very interesting Marriott. It was on top of this big hill, and there was like multiple buildings, and there were like these old historical brick buildings, and like it was surrounded by like green rolling hills. It was like this beautiful hotel and very not what you'd expect from a hotel. At least I live in LA, so for me it was like, what is all this green stuff? And why are there more buildings right next to me? Um, but what we're doing like a sunset stroll was kind of walking around the campus as it were, and I just made the comment offhandedly. I said, this place reminds me more of a retirement community than a hotel. And then we continued walking, and I was sort of thinking about that, like, oh, that'd kind of be an interesting place to set a story, a retirement community. That's kind of interesting. And we kind of kept walking and talking, and I kind of brought it up, and we were just kind of going back and forth about it. And I was like, yeah, I think there's something there. And then what if there was like a serial killer in a retirement home? That would be interesting. And we literally got back to the hotel room. I opened my laptop. I typed the words, the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. And then I wrote like two paragraphs. And I kind of say, just here's kind of what it would be. And I sent it to my agent. And then I went to dinner. We kind of forgot about it for a little bit. And then the next morning, I woke up. My agent had to reply and said, oh my God, you have to write this. And a few days later, I was in New York City. I was having drinks with my editor at Tor. And I said, hey, I have an idea. I want to bounce it off you. And I was like, it's a serial killer in a retirement home. And she was like, I'm in. I love it. Write it.
Mhm.
And I was like, I didn't even tell you all the stuff, all the good ideas that I came up with. And she was like, no, I'm like, yeah, tell me, but I'm in. So yeah, so I wrote it, and that was it. And I think, to segue into sort of like how it became sort of more personal to me is like, so when I first thought of the idea, um, I was kind of thinking it was going to be, I don't want to say a dark comedy, but in my mind, it was more it had more comedic elements. Like I had more gags. It was a little more slashery. It was a little more like B movie slashery. And and then I came up with Rose, who's my main character in the book for those who haven't read it, Rose Dubois. And man, she just kind of had this like presence, and she was very interesting, and she was very complex. And her voice was immediately in my head. Like she arrived fully formed, is how I mentioned it in my acknowledgments or my afterward. And and so that was one part. And then over the course of writing the book, which took about a year with outlining and everything, and by the time I got ready for first draft and all that stuff, and within that over the course of that year, both of my parents passed away. My father had dementia, and I had to go live with him. I had to go basically go live with him for a couple months and back in Michigan, and we basically had home hospice care. So I was taking care of him at home, and we had nurses coming in and the whole thing, and my mom at the time, neither of them could really move around. Like they're both in walkers. My mom couldn't prepare her own meals. My dad, of course, was couldn't do much of anything. And it was more with my father when you're taking care of someone with dementia, it's more of like you're kind of like corralling them and kind of making sure they don't hurt themselves or hurt someone else or do anything they shouldn't be doing. And because they obviously they get very confused and it's very sad. Um and they get paranoid and it's anyway, so it's a very difficult thing to go through. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but all that stuff that I went through with him, and then when he passed away, my mom and I were having these long conversations about what do I do now, and who's going to pay for this, and how am I going to eat, and where am I going to live, and the thing about retirement homes that and then on the other side, my wife's parents were who are much more active and healthy than my parents were when they passed, and they were moving in this, they were during the same time, they were moving into a retirement community. So I was seeing all their like brochures and
Yeah.
and we were having chats about it and their rationale for doing it while they were still healthy and vibrant. And they were like, well, you can't once you get to the point where you can no longer care for yourself, they won't take you. You have to get in before all that. So I learned a lot about that whole process. So all of that went into the book. And it made the book much more thematically speaking. It became much more about how we think of the elderly, how we treat the elderly, what the elderly are, how the elderly are mischaracterized, in my opinion, often cartoonishly. When a lot of horror movies you see that have an elderly villain, and there's body shaming, and there's like grotesquerie, and they kind of, and I felt like I wanted to write something that was more based in reality and that was more respectful of the elderly in our communities and in our lives. And so that kind of altered my approach. And then a lot of what I went through with my father went into the book, and a lot of what I talked about with my mother went into the book. And then also just the book itself, once I started writing it, it just became a different book. Than it just became much deeper, and the characters were really interesting to me, and I really got deep with a lot of the characters, and I just kind of felt myself getting more and more at home in this community of residents, and I don't know, I just kind of fell in love with the whole thing. And when you fall in love with something like that, you want to explore it. You want to explore the psychological depths of it. You want to explore the full range of characterizations. You don't want to just like kill everybody and haha, and let's move on to the next kill, and let's move on to the next kill. And so yeah, so on the surface, yes, it's a slasher. It's also a mystery. It's also a whodunit. It's also a thriller. It also has some supernatural stuff in it. It's definitely horror. It's definitely violent. But really, it's about these characters and the way they react, the way they're reacting to this fox in the henhouse situation where somebody has been dropped into their world and is tearing it apart. And so that was very interesting for me. All that stuff was like such rich fodder for me to explore, and so that's what the book ended up becoming.
Yeah. There's so much of what you said that I kind of want to touch upon, but I think, the biggest thing for me, the biggest for me is Rose because she's just like you said, she was very fully formed to you, she's very fully formed to the reader. Like she is such a self-assured character. Like she's just got such a presence that it's hard to not just take her in and remember her and hold on to her.
Yeah.
Um And the biggest thing I think, with Rose is that you give her such a strong interior life with her, because, we're seeing her thoughts and her everything else. We're seeing her struggle with some things that, you and I struggle, who are people who are not in retirement homes. We are not elderly. And
Yeah.
so we're kind of leveling the playing field. And I think we're kind of dropping that stigma that you talked about, is that kind of comes with writing or depicting elderly characters that we normally see. Normally it's like you said, like it's a caricature, but this is
Yeah.
not that. These are people, and I think that goes a really long way. um I want to talk about Rose just a little bit, honestly, because I just love her so much.
Yeah.
How does it feel for you to write Rose? Because one, I mean, like, obviously she is an elderly woman and you are not an elderly woman, so I imagine there's a little bit of a natural disconnect there. But as you mentioned, she was so fully formed to you. So I'm curious about your relationship with Rose and how you wrote her.
Yeah. I mean, as a writer, I'm not one who, it's very hard for me to say nice things about myself, but so I will preface this by saying I cannot play musical instruments. I'm geographically illiterate, and I can't learn foreign languages. But one thing that I am good at is I'm very good at mimicking characters that I make up in my head. And I'm very good at creating characters, and this is one of the, it's my one kind of like thing I can do well. And like with the Boys in the Valley, similarly, like there were like 30 boys, a lot of unique personalities. And yes, and same with, Autumn Springs. There's 80 residents, there's staff, there's nurses, there's administrators, there's police, a lot of characters in this book, and a lot of them get explored. So all the voices were unique, but Rose, to answer your question specifically, fell into my lap. Like I was so comfortable in her skin, and always knew exactly how she would respond to something. It was just, there's no real way to explain why that is, other than I think we probably would have been in real life. I think Rose and I would be very good friends. I think we would probably have some very in-depth conversations. Um, and Rose is also, she became increasingly complex as the book went on. Her, near the beginning of the writing process, Rose would say stuff, and I was kind of like, Rose, why are
Like,
you
what's that
acting that?
about? Yeah.
What's that about? Yeah, what's that all about? Let's talk about that. And, it wasn't really as until I went along that s- until I kind of learned Rose's backstory, and which made her even more fascinating to me. And so, yeah, she's just this great, every now and then you you're given a great character as a writer. And, I think of Henry in A Child Alone with Strangers, my awesome 8-year-old Henry. Um, and I think, and Rose in a very similar way just kind of arrived. And it was just so easy for me to fall into her and just write from her perspective. And, a lot of and also, I think there's something about, I think as you get older, you do fall in line. You do fall in a little bit easier with perspectives that maybe you would not have fallen into as easily when you're younger. Oh, for one thing, I have more life experience. I've been around. I went through what I went through with my parents. My in-laws, we hang out a lot and we have conversations. So I'm older, I'm an older guy. So it's not that big of a stretch for me to be like, to think about how I would be in my 70s or 80s. And one of the things that I think about, and I've mentioned this in an essay recently I did for Writer's Digest, and I want to touch on it, is there was, I think there's a little bit, and I don't mean this judgmentally, but I think there's a little bit of ageism in fiction. And
Mhm.
I think when I read a book by a very young writer, again, not judging, I'm just stating my case. And sometimes I'll be like, uh, you know, I'll have a moment where they'll be describing somebody who's like fragile, and maybe they've shuffled their feet, and maybe they have gray hair and they wear like natty cardigans. And then like I'll turn the page and I'll find out that they're like 42. And I'll be like, dude, no, like what are you talking about? Like I'm in my 50s and I could kick your ass. Like, no, it's not. No, it's not. People are not. And I think there's just a perspective. Just like when you're a little kid, you think your parents are ancient, and they were probably like in their 30s or 40s, right? And same thing. I think so. As you grow older, your perspective changes, and you realize, like, hey, man, 60s. is no longer what it used to be. 70s aren't, my father-in-law is in his 80s and he's a fencing club that he goes to 4 times a week. So I wanted to address that in the book. And I wanted my characters, for me, it was kind of like, look, these are like people. These are vibrant, energetic people with dreams and with concerns and with complex emotional and psychological depths that, these are not 2D cardboard cutouts in wheelchairs eating gruel, and they're not, and they shouldn't be, and they deserve your respect because they probably raised you, not these specifically, but
Yeah.
we were all raised, right? We all had parents and so I think sometimes there's a disconnect between perspective and what is actual the real case. And so I purposely wanted to make sure that majority of that these characters felt very real and very well rounded. And obviously there are characters who are more on the frail side, and there are characters who are dealing with illnesses, or there's a character in the book that has dementia, and there are people who need care, and I address all those issues as well. It's not like everybody's, it's not Cocoon, but that's a movie from the 80s for you younger kids. And but again, I don't want to sound like a get off my lawn kind of
No.
guy. I'm not shouting at the clouds, but I guess my point is that I do feel like I wanted to make sure that I treated these characters respectfully when I was writing them, and I was giving them, their due, as it
Yeah.
were. And I think that that's one of the things that I've noticed from people who have read the book and who have responded to the book is that's one of the things I keep hearing a lot about is people are saying like are very appreciative of how I treat these characters and the fact that they're not caricatures and the fact that they are very complex and interesting. And but at the same time, one of the things that and then I'll shut up for a second so you can ask another question. But at the same time, one of the things that I really enjoyed exploring in this book was how at that age there's definitely a comfort level to a degree with the idea of death. It's no longer this foreign
Yeah.
thing. Like when you're a little teenager and you're jumping off rooftops into the swimming pool, you're not thinking, you're indestructible, right? And I think as you get older, you start realizing a little bit more that like, okay, well, I want my life to have meaning and I want every minute to count. And then as you get older, maybe you start thinking like, well, you know what? I know it's coming and that's okay. And I'm going to enjoy the time I have and do all the things I want to do and live life to its fullest and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, while they have this familiarity and comfort with death, and I do talk about that in the book a little bit, although I think I reference him as death is sort of around every corner, and sometimes he's sitting with you when you're having your coffee, and sometimes he's sitting with you when you're having your midnight scotch, and maybe there comes a point where death sort of takes your hand and kind of leads you away, and that's sort of like the borderline sweet version of it. But then, so I wanted to contrast that with now there's a psychotic serial
Yeah.
killer.
A slasher. Yeah.
Right, killing your friends and violently pulling you from this existence and violently ripping people's from this life. And so that the contrast between how the residents were responding to that versus just like the natural course of things as life goes. That was something that I really had a lot of I found very interesting as a writer to explore that kind of like contrast. And so that was another thing that thematically runs throughout the book, I think, to a degree. So long answer to your question about Rose, but
Well, look, that's literally what the podcast is for the long answers. But there's a few things that I want to touch on as well. And I'm kind of curious if you've gotten this reception a lot. But the biggest thing I think of whenever I started reading this book was Golden Girls, the TV show, because they were so
interesting.
guilty of, I mean, those women were not they were the characters were not that old in that show,
No, they're like in
but
their
they
50s.
but they are dressed like
Yeah.
very elderly women. And I mean, it's my favorite show to watch when I'm sick. There's no better show to put on and
Funny.
just rest watching. But I mean, they have lives amongst themselves. They have lives with men. They have lives with their parent. Like it's the same interior life that you're giving your characters that they do in that show, except they're guilty of doing the older, depiction of the way that they dress, and things like that and how they
Right.
appear. But But I think that, to kind of touch on what you just mentioned about the contrasting nature of the slasher and the comfort of death whenever you're older, it's something that I really thought about because, I feel like for the most part, a lot of slashers that we, take in, whether it's film or book, is young people, and like that's like the real heartbreaking part of a slasher is just, carving your way through youth, right?
Right.
And so I
Destroying
think,
innocence, yeah.
yeah, and so
Or
then
not
there's
so
like
innocence, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that too. But there's this like dichotomy that you really kind of turn on its head with this book because it is violent means, ends to these people who are, like you said, are looking for the comfort, and it's not the young anymore. I mean, we're the and may I add, quite inventively, you've created some inventive ways that these people pass.
Yeah.
Um, seeing what this looks like for an older generation. And I don't know that we've gotten a lot of that. Like it's typically, sleepaway camps and kids hooking up in the woods or some location that they shouldn't. And I mean, we're getting that to be fair, but it's with the elderly and their own complications and their own. I mean, you bring up, like, well, my call button's in the next room. I don't have a call button next to me. And this, you know what I mean? Like those
Yeah.
things are
Yeah.
so, like you don't necessarily think about them all the time the way that you do in a normal slasher because I guess we're used to, but with age, you do have to contend with that. And, to share like a little bit of a personal anecdote, I started this book over the summer. I was planning to read it and have it done way earlier, and then my grandmother got really ill and needed like multiple surgeries, and I was like, I just can't do this right now. Like this is too touch and go for me. This is hitting a little too close to home. And I think the thing that I had to contend with the most was she's very headstrong mentally and her body was failing her.
Yeah.
And having that strength of mind, but not having the strength of body was really rough to like, kind of contend with. And we see that kind of partially in one of your characters, whenever the killing starts, there are certain things that take hold of these characters at the hands of somebody else and that inhibits their ability to act normally, is how I'll put it. But we do get perspective of them being present of mind and trying to fight and, resolve. And that's one of the most harrowing, heartbreaking things I think I've experienced in this life with through somebody else, obviously, and then reading about, I felt like that would, there's obviously plenty of this book that's horrific, but that is one of the gut punches, I'll say. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but it's rough.
There's a lot of gut punches in this one. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that, and yeah, and it's yeah, and I remember you mentioning that about your grandmother when we were at StokerCon, and I was like, don't read the book.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
give yourself some time. But yeah, I think I mean to your point exactly is one of the things for me is as a writer, generally speaking, is I don't like I want the reader to feel the kill,
Yeah.
or feel the horror of what's happening. And sometimes I think, that's not always like by through, a lot of, over description of the violence or over description of the gore. Sometimes it's about giving you a snapshot of what that person is thinking when something bad is happening to them or when they're being attacked or whatever. And so yeah, that was very purposeful. And I think there's a couple deaths in the book where I thought were kind of like beautiful in a way, at least when I was writing
Oh,
them.
I've got a bone to pick with you about one of them. Me and Neil
Oh, all right.
McRobert both do because we've talked about it, and I'm sure
Yeah,
you can probably guess which one it
Neil's
was.
still mad at me. Yeah, but
Yeah.
Neil's still mad at me for Child Alone with Strangers, so he needs to get over it. But yeah, but yeah, so but there was I tried to not not make it just something that is something that's easy to shake off as a reader. I want the readers to really be impacted emotionally and psychologically, and I want them to, that's part of that's part of the trap with making you like the characters too. Is I'm going to write these characters that you're going to kind of like fall in love with. But dude, look at the cover of the book. It's called Massacre, and
Yeah.
I just and some apologies in advance, but um, and so yeah, the answer is yes. I definitely make a point of it, and it's a good point to make. But it can be painful, especially if if you're going through something in real life, to read about what one of the characters may be thinking about in their final moments, and maybe remembering something sweet from their childhood, or maybe thinking of a loved one. yeah, it kind of adds to the tragedy of the whole thing. And that's something I do. I mean, I like, I want these, I want all my books to be hopefully remembered. And when, I would like for people to have an experience that's not just because yeah, the books are supposed to be entertainment, 100%. My stories are very much entertainment. Um, but I think having an emotional reaction to something adds a lot of layers for a reader that, they might not get from a different book. And the same with like movies or TV shows. If you're connecting with the characters, um, you're much more into what's, the show, and then when you have the blood wedding, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
you're
you're
like
screaming.
angry. Like I remember all those videos, right, of people throwing stuff at their TVs and everything. And so yeah, so it's just something the way I like to personally set it up and run it. And I'm very it's very interesting to me to write in-depth characters. I love exploring the psychological and emotional aspects and background and of my characters, especially my main characters. Um, so yeah,
Well, I think the interesting thing in particular with this book is that like you said, it is sometimes hard to have to read that like the internal monologue whenever they're in their last these characters are in their last moments and they're wanting to live and obviously the outcome isn't looking too great. But the thing about that internal voice is that that internal voice doesn't have age. It's not affected by their
right.
physical condition whenever you tell this story. So talking about how we're trying to bridge the gap between the youth that we're used to and the elderly who we feel like have been portrayed maybe not in the best, most authentic way. I think that's the way that you do it because we recognize that voice. I mean, that's the same way that you feel whenever you get landed a tough blow right now in this day and age. Whenever, I mean, like I'm 27. If I was incapacitated, I wouldn't be thinking any different than that, right?
Right.
So I think it's one of those things that you do really well with this book that evens the playing field for everybody, right? And
Yeah.
there's a part, and one of the things that I really love about Rose is you give her this kind of speech. She gives this speech about her standing her ground and wanting to live and like and recognizing like yeah, we're old and yeah, I know we're dying here and we're dying anyway, but there's still reasons that I want to live, and her speech about that I was really touched by. I think that just kind of extends that grit, I guess, tenacity. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Yeah. I mean, I took some swings with Rose's character. It's not, she does some things. I mean, not, so I don't read my reviews, but I do read my reviews leading up to publication because I
mhm.
want to know how the book is being received, generally speaking, from reviewers. And then once the book comes out, I generally stop reading reviews because I don't, it doesn't do any good. But I do like to know, how things are going. Everyone wants to know, reviewers or early reviewers are liking the book or not liking the book. So, but see if I can phrase it in a way that's not spoilery. But Rose makes some decisions for herself that you could easily, probably arguably call selfish and be correct. But she's very selfish, in a way, in an earned way. And I
Yeah.
think, Rose in the book, she has a daughter, she has a grandchild. And I did read a review where somebody was like, kind of didn't like Rose because she put herself first, in some of those situations. And I think it just kind of frustrated them as a reader. But Rose is she's kind of she was a bit of a tight wire act, because she was very strong, she's very independent, she has a very dark background, which readers will find out about when they read the book. And but she also has all these desires, and she's also teased. It's almost like she's teased by love, even though she's not looking for love, and she's teased by friendship, even though she's not looking for a lot of friendship. She wants her independence, and she wants the life the way she wants it, and so yeah, so it was I had to kind of like make some decisions with her that I knew they were the decisions that she would make, but there were a couple of swings with her where that I took where I knew it would be potentially controversial, just because it's probably not the norm. So, but I thought it was yeah, but I go, but that's Rose. Like that's
Well,
who
and I
she
think that
is,
that's I think that's people too. And I think honestly, like that's a woman who has been through some shit and is affected by the shit that she's been through. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's just kind of how the cards fall, I guess. But to touch on something that you bring up though, you bring up, whether love might be looking for her even if she's not looking for it. We have to talk about her and Miller. I mean, fairly early on, he's introduced. He's another resident there, and they kind
Yeah.
of have this like will they, won't they thing. That's not a spoiler to say, but I was living for it. I was so here for it, just front and center.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a sucker for those kind of stories anyway, but in particular with them, just because of how set in Rose's ways that she is, and how just and readers who read the book will know how Miller is. So I
Yeah.
wanted to see if you could talk about their dynamic a little bit because I'm also very interested in Miller, even though we don't get, as much time with him as we do with Rose. I'm very curious as to how their dynamic came to be from your perspective.
Um, so yeah, Miller, I always had Miller in my head. He was always called Miller. She was always called, I think actually in that little 2 paragraph thing I sent to my agent, I think it was Rose and Miller.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the first thing that got me into Miller's character was he has this quirk. He has a couple quirks. One of the quirks is he eats these candies all the time. He's always eating these peppermint candies. And another quirk is he's very chivalrous, and he always like he tips his invisible cap, to women, and when he walks by and stuff like that. And he's a very sweet guy, at least, that's how he's initially presented. And where it goes from there, I can't say. But yeah, I think I originally had them. I always knew they'd be friends, and I don't know if I knew the dynamic of that friendship until I started writing. Because this book actually was one of the rare books that I've written that I didn't really outline extensively. It kind of ended up being something I really more pantsed, as they say. So the characters were kind of developing real time, and um, and so that will they won't they thing was something that actually I was sort of intrigued by too as I was writing it, because I wasn't really sure how far Rose would go. How open she would allow herself to be to someone who is basically courting her.
Hmm.
And there's a chapter in the book early on where I think was when you first meet Tatum Bird, and Rose is sitting next to Tatum at the pond, and I was like, I wanted to describe the pond and sort of this setting because I knew I was going to be a recurring set, as it were, in my book. And so I was like, okay, well, I think it has like these bushes, and it's sort of here's where it is geographically, and then there's like a couple benches, and there's some koi in the pond, and then I was like, and there's gonna be, I want there to be some rose bushes because of rose. I want to try and tie that in. I wasn't really sure how yet, and so I was researching rose bushes. And I was like, rose bushes in upstate New York in October, what would be happening? What are we looking at? What kind of rose bushes are they? And I read about, I am not a botanist, and I'm also not a very smart person, but because I read about these rose bushes, and I was like, these Madame Hardy rose bushes, and the idea behind it that I read that I thought was very fascinating, and this is how you can know you can get your ideas from anywhere, is that they have to have their winters in order to have their springs and summers. If they don't have their winters, they won't bloom again in the spring and summer. They've got to have that downtime, that hibernation period. And and I immediately said to myself, I was like, God, that's Rose.
Yeah.
Like that's Rose's heart. She is in the winter months. And the question is, will her heart see summer?
Hmm.
Will her heart ever see summer again? And I actually sectioned that, or titled that section Madam Hardy. And that really was the moment for me when I kind of knew who Rose was, exactly who Rose was. And when I knew exactly what would happen with her and Miller. And so yeah, sometimes you find inspiration in weird places, but that was sort of, I think that was the moment, very clarifying moment for me with Rose, and I knew from then on how it would go with her. And but yeah, again, Miller, man, he's like this Ossie Davis kind of dude. He's just sort of like
He's
tall,
very
lanky.
endearing. He's very
He is.
endearing. You write him very endearingly.
He's he's a old professor, and he's got
Yeah.
the he's Miller's like comfort food. He's just like he's the guy who shows up and pulls off the crust of the pie and gets his hand slapped, and then sort of like puts his hands up defensively and with this little smile on his face, and that's kind of Miller, right? And he's
Yeah.
just a sweetheart, at least again, like I said, on the surface, I think. And
Yeah. Presentingly.
so that was I enjoyed that element of them as well. It was a nice added layer to the whole story, the whole slasher slash whodunit slash mystery slash thriller slash horror book slash will they won't they romance. So yeah, it was a nice layer to explore, and it didn't need a lot. I
Yeah.
didn't need to do a lot with it. I just needed the little moments here and there, and I think a lot of it comes across just in the way Rose, just in the things he says and the things that Rose thinks. I think it's so subtle throughout, but it definitely plays
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
I think if you get Rose as a character, then it kind of like it's an extra blow to know like whenever he does something that he does or he doesn't do something that he normally does, it's like, if you know how Rose is as a person, then it speaks volumes that it would mean that certain thing would mean something to her, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. And
But
it gets
but
their relationship gets pretty complex by the end, so we'll leave it
yeah.
at that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one of the big things that I want to talk to you about, and I'm going to preface this with, I don't know if this comparison has been made by anybody else either, and I purposely stay away from any other interviews with an author if it can be helped before I
Sure.
talk to them because I never want to repeat a question if I can help it or like steal material. But I when I was reading this book, I could not help but think of Salem's Lot. Um,
Interesting.
in terms of the lives that you give these people and the scenes and the little vignettes that we get throughout. It reminded me so much of and it's been a while since I've read Salem's Lot, so forgive me if I misspeak or misquote on this, but there's like that chapter about like the one night where everybody like something bad happens, like they get visited every night. And it's like literally it's like the normal house, like the mundane suburban house, and then it's like the trailer park where somebody's getting beaten, and then it's like
Yeah.
all across, town, you're getting like little pieces of what's going on. And you have a couple chapters that are like that. And then on the flip side, there's a part of this book that reads like The Stand, the chapter of No Such Great Loss. There's I believe like two or three little vignettes that you give us like it's like, oh yeah, and then this happened and this is what it is. And I could not help but think of those two books when I was reading this. And I mean, King has an influence on all of us at this point. We've all read his stuff, but I was curious if you had gotten that from anybody else and if at all that, a retirement community is a small town, essentially. The
Yeah.
small townness of Salem's Lot
I'd
is
agree with
very
that. Yeah.
palpable in horror. So I'm just kind of curious if there was any conscious influence there for you in this writing process at all.
No, I have not gotten that question, first of all, so that's a new one. Uh, the community was very, I thought you make a very good point about, yeah, it is like a small town, right? This retirement community is a small town, and these are the residents. And, it is a little needful thingsy, it may probably be a Stephen King book that I would pull out. Um, and that, I'm a big fan of small town horror. I'm a big Bradbury guy. I'm a big King guy. And I like the idea of, kind of creating this island where things happen, but that are, that's like a small town or whether it be an orphanage or whether it be a retirement community. I like isolation horror very much. So, anytime I can kind of create that isolation vibe, like my novella Saculina, where they're in the deep ocean or anyway, but um, and yeah, so for this, yeah, and much like the small town that you mentioned in the Salem's Lot kind of vibe, um, there, everything is like kind of inside these borders, if you will. Like in Salem's Lot, so much about the town and people, but the difference between Salem's Lot is people get in their station wagons and they escape, they leave,
Yeah.
like the sheriff or whatever. And what I didn't want that, I didn't want these people to be able to leave. And so I addressed that. And but
That was
one thing,
actually, now that you say it, that was the chapter that I thought of The Stand, the No Such Great Loss. There's a
yeah,
chapter whenever the residents are trying to plan, like, hey, where can I go? And they start calling up their children, and they're
right.
finding out there's really nowhere else I can go. That was what made me think of The Stand.
Yeah, because there's a killer and they all know it at this point of the book, and then they realize there's no place for there's no place for them to go, which is if you have an elderly parent or grandparent, imagine them being broke and in this community, retirement community with no one willing to help them. Where are they going to go? They're not going to go, they are basically, and I make this comment in the book. I said they're basically it's an octogenarian orphanage, right? Um, and that was kind of also like a wink to Boys in the Valley, and they're kind of similar setups. But one thing about the community that I wanted to mention is it was very important to me that the reader feel like it was a real thriving, diverse, complex community of varying personalities. I didn't want it to be like Lost, where like there's four people that you meet and then everyone else is like in the background. And so it was important to me to kind of have a lot of different colorful, vibrant, interesting characters going, so you feel like there's a lot of people, you meet a lot of these residents, you meet Henry Barber and you meet the three sisters and you meet Stan, and his conspiracy theories. And, you don't just meet the four or five main people or whatever it is. And so that was important to me. And I went into it knowing that I wanted to make sure I spread the character wealth, that I don't just tell you as a reader, hey, there's 80 people here, 80 people in this community, just so you know. So when people start dying, it's not the guy in the red shirt from Star Trek. It's actually somebody you meet and you are spend some time with, to a degree. So that was, yeah. So much to your point about Salem's Lot and about the idea of it being sort of a small town vibe is I definitely, in order to get the way you accomplish that, and like you said, bouncing around from house to house, but also making sure that like all these characters have a unique original voices, that they all have unique original personalities that a reader can connect with or empathize with. And that's like, I love doing that. I love character development. It's like such a passion for me. So I love coming up with new characters who have, the easy thing is like give one guy an eye patch and give the other guy a limp. But, in screenwriting, that's kind of one of those tricks. Like, oh, he has a limp. That's how you know who it's always that guy. But yes, I like exploring those different kind of character, variations and giving them quirks and giving them backstories. And that creates a richer environment and it makes it feel like you're really immersed in this community versus it being sort of like this, you know, uh, two-dimensional backdrop. It feels like a real thriving, vibrant community that this killer has walked into. So yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate the comparison, and I don't, I buy it. I think any kind of like, I think anytime you can create a sort of community element where it feels like a small town where everyone kind of knows each other and there's sort of that, the sheriff and there's all these kind of like pinballing personalities and how they interact and how they react. That's kind of one of the big things with Autumn Springs was, um, that interested me about it was I want to see, how these people are going to react to me throwing a grenade into this little world of theirs, and how will they react toward each other, and how they will they react uh, toward this, danger. And so that was something that I really enjoyed kind of exploring.
Yeah, and I think in doing so though, like it raises the stakes so much because like you said, you didn't want it to just be like off-screen character number six, like it's
Right.
somebody that you probably knew by name. If something happens to them, you're gonna care a little bit more whenever you know them. And we're gonna get towards the top of the hour, so I'm gonna ask my big question here
Oh
is
boy.
that, the perceived evil, I always call it like the big bad, right? And I'm not gonna say what it is because that's the spoiler. Um, you balance a lot of different ideas with the big bad. There's like, I don't think that this is a spoiler to say this part, but there's kind of like a social hysteria kind of angle towards the end of this book where everybody's just panicking and nobody knows what to do. And then there's, obviously like the actual who it is, and when you find out, it's upsetting that it's happening.
Yeah.
There's the component of this like other kind of possibly supernatural thing that kind of comes in. Like how did it feel for you to juggle all of that? And you wrapped it up rather neatly, I might add. It's pretty neatly buttoned up. So, you know, I feel like sometimes whenever you're trying to land all of these planes, it can get a little hectic, but how did it feel for you to juggle all these different kinds of balls? Because again, it's not even the same one. It's different kinds.
Yeah. Well, I knew I didn't want to, I did want it, I wanted the, again, going back to the vibrancy of the community, I wanted there to, I kind of wanted the reader to be like, what is going on at Autumn Springs? Like, what is with, you know, like literally, what is going on? Because there's some weird stuff happening. And by distracting the reader a little bit, um, and saying, well, maybe it's this, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's something that's, maybe it's supernatural, maybe it's not supernatural. Um, for me, that was just a lot of fun to be able
Mhm.
to kind of create that. Because when you add something supernatural to a story and to a very grounded story, all of a sudden, all bets are off,
Yeah.
right? It can be anything can be happen, and that's the beauty of writing supernatural horror, supernatural thrillers is you're kind of like throwing open the closet and like anything can come out. So as far as balancing it is concerned, because I invest so much in the characters, I feel like it's not very hard for me to land all those planes because I know what the characters are going to do. And so I'm so focused on the characters that
Mhm.
the other stuff is kind of, um, I'm really just responding to what I know they would do. Once I have them in my mind, like the three sisters, I know the three Bs, I know how they would respond and how they would react. And that's another situation where I could have gone very caricature with those guys. I ended up, I didn't want to. I really wanted them to feel like real people, even though they are kind of like these kind of witches and they're very eccentric. And there's a couple of scenes in which I address that. But um, yeah, so I remember thinking that I wanted to have some very outlandish elements to what is like a very grounded trope, which is like there's a killer killing people at this
Yeah.
camp or at this place or at this island or wherever it is. But it's a slasher. But I didn't want it to be a traditional slasher in the sense that it's just like all about the kills and it's all about who the killer is and what's the killer's motivation and I didn't want it to be about all that. I wanted it to be about these characters and how they responded to different things. And I really wanted this community to feel really exciting and interesting and vibrant. And so adding a couple of those elements, um, I think really kind of made it more playful and made it more, like I said, kind of like opened it up to what exactly is going on here. And I don't think you ever really know until it's over what exactly is going on. And I mean, when it's over, because yeah, anyway. Um, but yeah, so I'll be honest. And then all that said, I did not outline this novel, and which is
Mhm.
very, very rare for me. I outlined all my novels. I've already outlined Gothic too. I outlined Gothic. I outlined Boys in the Valley. I outlined all my screenplays. I don't like writing until I know what's going to happen. I don't want to be writing a chapter and be like, gee, I wonder what's going to happen next, or I wonder what's going to happen later in this book. I want to know exactly where I'm going so I can focus on writing the actual prose and creating interesting characters. And I just want to put all my energy into like the scene. I don't want to worry about, oh, I got to write it this way because I have this thing coming up next. I don't know what I'm going to do next. So I'm going to meander and I'm going to just drag it on until I can figure it out. So, but this one I didn't have the outline because this book refused to be outlined, which was kind of frustrating. I knew I had a couple of key scenes. I had my main characters. I kind of had some ideas of what I was going to do, but I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know who the killer was. I didn't know, a lot, like I just mentioned about the Madame Hardy scene, like that came, that's all happened live. So, and even the will they won't they stuff. And I didn't know really exactly where everything was going to go. So all that to say about your landing planes, I think it's just one of those things where I got lucky. You know?
Hey, I'll take that answer.
I think I got lucky. I think it was I knew I had all the I had all the pieces on the board,
Hmm.
and I just had to believe that I would be able to kind of like that it was all going to come together.
Yeah.
And but it wasn't until I was writing the end, like the last 50 pages or something, that I really figured it all out. And and even to the extent where, and I'm going to phrase this very carefully, but even to the extent where, I, in my head, when I was finishing the book, when I was writing the last chapter of the book, in my head, I had another chapter to write that was going to be somewhat of a reveal.
Yeah.
And when I wrote what is now the last chapter, I was like, nope, 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 that's it. We're done. And I ended up, so even that ended up changing a little bit. So then when I went back and did a big rewrite, I kind of made sure everything worked perfectly and was smooth and transit, and all the pieces fell into place and what have you. But yeah, I appreciate it. I think not being a big pantser, I do feel like at the end of the day, it just I just got lucky. I had some very vague ideas about how things were going to go, but yeah, no, it wasn't until I was writing like I said, the last 50 or so pages that I was kind of like pacing around my house, and I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to do,
Yeah.
and yeah, it just worked out.
Look, sometimes that's how it happens. I mean, that's as good of an answer as, oh, I plotted it for 300 days and spent the next 65 doing,
Yeah, it's
XYZ.
dangerous though, man. It's dangerous because you don't want to be like, Stephen King has notoriously bad endings because he never knows where he's going with the story. He never outlines these stories. He makes them up as he goes, and it bites him in the ass sometimes, or a lot of times. And I didn't want it to just be like, oh, I'm just gonna do this, or I'm just gonna make it this thing, and that's Deus Ex Machina or Machina, or how they pronounce that fucking thing. But yeah, so it was it felt very dangerous when I was writing it, but I also kind of like had a pretty strong idea of how it was going to go. I was very confident about it, even though I wasn't 100% sure. But generally speaking, yeah, I don't like to do it that way, especially
Yeah.
when you're writing a whodunit thriller mystery, because um, you want to be able to plant red herrings, and you want to be able to have misdirection, and you don't want, and I'm not a big like rewriter either, so I like to, my first drafts, generally speaking, are pretty close to what gets published, with, I do a cleanup polish, but I don't do major like overhauls. This book I had to do a pretty significant overhaul because I did not overly outline it. I did have to go back and make sure, kind of like, you know redo the surface, as it were, and sprinkle some things in throughout, and take some things out as well that I had in there originally. But so yeah, so it was an interesting process. I wouldn't say that I will never do it again. I would say that I would prefer not to do it again that way. But I also really enjoyed the process of writing this book, and it was just it was fascinating to write a book that way. But it's also, you're definitely skating on thin ice.
But I think I'm going to argue this one point and then we'll leave it be. But, you talk about how you kind of wanted to institute like never really knowing what's going on at Autumn Springs. And so you kind of threw all these points out there. But nothing is ever needless. Nothing is ever wasted in this book. Like there's a
Yeah,
reason that all of it's there. So I
yeah,
think that kind of like letting yourself roam creatively, like just like you call it luck, it just worked out in the end or whatever. But I mean, I think that it did what it was supposed to do, because I didn't know what the hell was going on. And like you said, once you start hinting at the supernatural, that something other is going on, then you really can't guess at all because
right.
truly anything is possible. So
And
I
you
think that
don't
that's
even know
the
if the supernatural is really supernatural. I mean,
no, I
and
mean,
I'm not going to tell you on this podcast whether it is or isn't. But yeah, but it adds that element of like, I'm adding variables without adding them to, thank you for saying what you're saying, because I take a lot of pride in not just adding them for the sake of adding them. They all have a point, and there's a reason for everything to be there, and there's a reason for all the characters to be there. And yeah, like I said, like you said, actually, which I appreciate. Yeah, I think it all tied up really nicely. And yeah, it's an interesting, yeah, it,
yeah.
it goes in an interesting direction.
Yeah, I agree. But again, I think that it's all very cool, and I appreciate the way that you decided to bring things to a close. But that does bring a wrap on my burning questions about the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. What are you allowed to talk about in terms of what you're working on now, what we can look forward to coming from you, and like all the things that you're allowed to say without getting in trouble with your publishers or your publicist
Yeah,
or whoever?
yeah. No, yeah, yeah. No, I have yeah, I have a book coming out. Well, we talked about yeah, I have
Hmm.
Child Alone with Strangers paperbacks coming out October 28th, and that's got a new introduction by Clay McLeod Chapman. That's got a bonus story, so I'm excited for that paperback to come out. It's got a cool cover by Francois Valancourt. And then Gothic is being reissued by Clash. That comes out November 11th. That also has a bonus story. Did you read Gothic?
Oh yeah, I did.
Oh, that's right.
In
That's right. We
a
talked.
day. In a
Yeah.
day.
So the Gothic has the bonus story, quote unquote. It's actually an excerpt from a Tyson Parks novel.
I'm gonna pick that up so I
So it's
don't
got a
get that.
Tyson
But
Parks
yeah.
excerpt in it. And Tyson writes a little differently than I do. And he's a
Okay.
little, Tyson's kind of a weird dude. So that's an interesting excerpt. And then in April of next year, I have a Civil War horror novel called Serafina, which is coming out also from Clash Books. And then I have a story collection called Traps and Specters with an introduction by Matt Dinneman, who wrote the Dungeon Crawler Carl books. That's coming out from Shortwave in September. And then I have, if I get my ass in gear and write it, I will have Gothic 2 coming out in April of 2027, the sequel called Gothic The End, which is the sequel to Gothic. And then I have another book scheduled for summer of 2027 that I cannot announce because the publisher hasn't made that announcement yet. But I'm excited about that as well. And then hopefully next year, Alter from A24, the
Yeah,
movie, will come out based on my short story of the same name. That's in Behold the Void. That has wrapped production. It has wrapped post-production. So I'm just waiting for them to tell me when it's coming out, but hopefully next summer. And then hopefully we go into production on Failsafe with J.J. Abrams producing and J.T. Molnar directing off a Brian Duffield script with Brie Larson
it's a big one.
starring. Yeah, so that's a cool. Hopefully that goes into production early next year. That's the fingers crossed. So yeah, so that's pretty much all I got on my plate right now. I have a
That's all he says.
there's a
So that's
novella
totally
coming
fair.
out next year at some point called Overpass.
Hmm.
So that I think people will have fun with. Yeah, so that.
That's it.
And some
Yeah.
other and there's some other
Just a
stuff.
few things. Just a
There's
few
some
little things.
stories and
Yeah.
some deluxe editions and all that kind of thing. But yeah, but that's primarily what's going on.
Well, I mean, that's plenty to look forward to, and that's great for everybody who's a Fracassi fan. I'm thrilled that Serafina's getting the bigger release. A Child Alone with
Yeah.
Strangers is getting the paper. I'm really happy that those are getting the publicity that they're going to get, with the releases that they're getting.
Yeah, Child Alone was one of those books where it did not find its audience, and but the people who did read it loved it so much,
Yeah.
and it's a book that I love so much. But it's a 600-page crime thriller horror book. Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with bad timing, bad cover, and a lot of different other variables. So yeah, I think thank you for saying. I think the paperback is going to do hopefully find a lot more readers, especially now because Boys in the Valley's come out. People like it. It's
Yeah.
getting in bookstores. Autumn Springs, I think, is doing okay. And so I think now with Gothic and A Child Alone with Strangers coming out over the next month, back to back, I think hopefully the people will discover those books as well, start finding some of the old catalog from 2023.
Yeah. From here a few years
My
ago.
early work, yeah.
Yeah. No, I love it. I'm thrilled that it's getting that treatment. But thank you so much as always, Philip. I mean, we always have, I feel like, pretty decent conversations about your books, and it's always a delight to, take a deep dive on books like these, especially whenever you care as much about your characters as you do. I mean, it comes through whenever you talk about it, and obviously in reading it, it's there. So it's really nice to get some of the background on how they are and how they came to be and what they mean to you. Is
I
there
care
any?
about them deeply right up until the moment I kill them.
I was about to say, yeah, right up until you hurt me and Neil's feelings with your
Right.
deaths. Yeah. Is there anything that I did not bring up or mention that you wanted to do before we close out?
No, 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 all your questions covered the bases, man. You did a great job. I, no, I just hope that people enjoy the book. That I hope folks have fun reading it. I hope it's a little escapism from the real horrors of the world, and then it's a nice a getaway for folks who find it.
Yeah, I would argue that it is, and thank you so much. So, Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre is already on shelves from Tor Nightfire. Everybody should go pick up a copy, and there's plenty more to look forward to from Mr. Fracassi. So stay tuned for that. And thank you so much, Philip. Always a delight.
Thanks, Anna. Appreciate it.
A huge thank you again to Mr. Philip Fracassi for coming back on the podcast to talk about his book, The Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. It's one of my favorite reads of the year. I really, really enjoyed this book. It just kind of has something for everybody, I think, even if you're a thriller reader who's looking to dip your toe into the horror genre, or if you're a horror reader who's looking for a little bit more of a whodunit than normal. I think that this book has something for everyone. That's made possible through, the stellar character work at play with Rose and co. So I hope that you all enjoyed this book as much as I did and this conversation with Philip. Looking forward to next week, I get to share my conversation with Haley Newland. She is the author of the film you're about to see. It is a really, really cool story set in kind of this drive-in era, 1950s horror, and it's really unique. It's a really cool story, and my chat with her is something that I've really, really enjoyed. Just getting connect with her about horror films of the time, her inspirations behind that story, and everything else that comes with it. So stay tuned next week for